Hey guys, welcome back to the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast. I'm Tim Windsor. Thanks again for joining me. Today I am coming at you with my 100th episode. And as you can see, if you're looking on the YouTube channel, I am recording this again on the road in our trailer, having a great time camping and celebrating this, my 100th episode of the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast. And what I want to do today is tell you a bit of my journey that I've had over the last 100 episodes, what I've learned about myself, what have I learned about the process, and actually the big grand lesson. For those of you who follow my podcast, you probably already know this. For those of you maybe new to my podcast, you may not understand this, but I'm going to entitle this 100th episode Failing Forward, or Failing Upward, or Failing into Unplanned Success. I'm not quite sure the title yet, but that's the theme of this episode, because actually this podcast comes because of a significant failure in my life and in my vision and my goal. I failed to do something, and as a result of that, I have this podcast. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what 100 episodes means in a podcast world. And then I'll explain what it means to me. But statistics tell us that only 17% of podcasts in the world, and there's something like 2.9 million podcasts, have over 50 episodes. And only 7% of what are considered low-income podcasts, that would be mine, and I'll explain why. Low-income podcasts have over 100 episodes. Only 7% of low-income podcasts have over 100 episodes. And the reason why, of course, because it's kind of silly to keep doing this for so long without it making you some good money. But that's never been what it's been about for me, and so I don't really care about that. And so I would be listed in that 7% of low income, in this case no income podcasts, that has over 100 episodes, because people obviously quit because they're not getting what they want out of it, which I never wanted, and have no intention of making this an income generating experience. Now, according to Listen Notes, which is considered to be the most comprehensive database of podcast information and podcasts online, the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast is now ranked in the top 10% of the most popular podcasts globally. That's not bad, but to be really honest, that doesn't really mean that much, because it only means there's, about 263,000 or so podcasts that are more popular than the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast. But it also does mean that there are 2.6 million podcasts not quite as popular as the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast. But in the end, here's the reality. Who cares? Who cares? Because that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because I love it. I love doing it. I'm having a blast. I love chatting with people, meeting people, learning along the way, and sharing some of the insights that I've learned over the many years that I've had the privilege of encountering other humans. And so this podcast for me really is an exciting opportunity to share my thoughts, to explore ideas with people, and to sort of go down this meandering road of what this idea of being uncommodified, of standing out and standing up for all the right reasons, and as my shirt says now, helping me understand how to break the evil spell of sameness. Now, why this podcast and how did it come? Well, again, it came through failing. Let me explain. For those of you who already know this, it'll be a reminder. For those of you who don't, you might find this interesting. I have this podcast because I failed to do something. I intended originally to write a book. I set out to write a book. I've continued to fail at doing that. I still have not written that book, although it is getting done. It's still not there. So I have failed still to produce a book that I wanted to produce, and I set out to produce a number of years ago. And in fact, I've spent close to $30,000 on this book adventure, and I have nothing to show for it. And so this podcast actually came out of that failure. And the journey that I went on is back in early 2020, just actually before COVID sort of hit and we got in the grips of COVID. I was speaking at an event for a customer in Las Vegas. And a good friend of mine who had never really seen me teach and encounter a group in that setting happened to be there. And after it, he came to me and said, "Hey, Tim, I know you're trying to write a book and it hasn't gone well for you. It's not working. I know why." And I remember saying to him, "Mike, why?" And he said, "Because you've chosen the wrong media or medium to try to produce this in the sense that you are most naturally a speaker, communicator, not necessarily a writer, and you're hampering yourself by thinking you have to write this on a computer and type it out, which is And I'm not a great typer, by the way, so that's hard. And so he actually said that the secret forward maybe for me would be to podcast, and possibly I could use the podcast as a way of getting out some material for a book and then eventually create that. So in the beginning, it was the failure to write a book that began this discussion. And literally that happened the end of January. By the beginning of April that year, 2020, I started the podcast. Now, with that being said, I also then encountered COVID like so many of you did. I encountered COVID in March 16th of 2020. I flew back from my last business trip while the airports were closing. And then I went into lockdown like all of you did. And actually that COVID experience, as much as it was terrible, actually was a gift to me because it put me closer to the center of my office and my home, and then therefore I could create a studio, and I wasn't on the road as much as I'd been here. In 2019, I was on the road over 156 days for business and pleasure. I was away from my home office or from my house, and so recording would have been very difficult, if not probably just not, I wouldn't been able to do it. It wasn't going to be possible. And so putting me close to home, COVID, although being restrictive, it put me close to that place, and I could create a podcast studio and begin to sort of braille out this experience. And so it was the utter failure to produce the book that caused this journey to start for me. And so I want to remind you of this, in that, maybe you're experiencing failure in an area of your life today, and you think that failure means the end. You think that failure means that you have to give up. Maybe you think that failure means that you, not only did you fail, that you're a failure. And that you go now self-identify as a failure, and that crushes you with a weight, and you've decided to turtle up and say, I guess I can't move forward. I failed, and I can never recover. This experience for me with the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast and the failure to write the book, which is still in the failure category, has shown me that actually sometimes we can fail forward or fail upward, or actually find something so different that we had through failure that we never intended to find. I never, ever, ever had an idea once in my life had I ever considered podcasting. Didn't even think of it. Didn't even listen to podcasts really. And all of a sudden, my world was awakened by this comment that my friend made, and it set me on a journey. And that journey has been awesome. I think I've done a lot of things wrong, and I think I've done a lot of things right in that journey. And one of the things I did right in that journey was hiring some great professional and getting some help in the beginning, getting some consultation from people. Hiring a great technical editor and a great producer who could create an environment of sound quality that is excellent in my opinion. In fact, I've had people reach out to me at times and tell me that the audio quality, particularly the stuff we do in studio, obviously not so much maybe the stuff I do on my iPhone and stuff, but the stuff we do in studio is world-class audio quality. I have a great producer. I have a producer who also busts my balls every once in a while. And I produce something or I record something, and I get a call from my producer, Chris, and he says, that's not good enough. You need to go back and do it again. You think that's really got energy on it and it's a great recording. It's not. It was lackluster. And I go back and I record it again. And Chris pushes me, and Alin, my technical producer and also editor and producer, she pushes me to do things differently and better and challenge myself. So I've learned a lot over time. And originally, the intention of the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast is it was going to be just me speaking. And then one day my wife came to me and said, you know what, Tim, to be honest, my favorite podcasts are not just an individual speaking. They're somebody having a conversation or doing interviews. And that's where the whole idea of uncorked conversations came from. It actually came from an idea from my wife. And I didn't want to do interviews in that traditional sense, and I'd never done it before. And so I wanted to explore this idea, but what if I created an environment where I would uncork a drink with somebody across a table, virtually a lot of the times, and sometimes in person, and have a chat with them, and enter into a conversation about a subject that held mutual interest for us. What would that look like? And that's where the uncork conversations came from. And then there's been other series along the way that I've done on this idea of uncommodification, the Unender series that I've been working on that's not complete, that I'm actually struggling to finish because it's been hard figuring out what I want to articulate in some of the areas on this idea of being unenders, a legacy that we leave. But my big message to you today in this is, you like me can fail forward. Is there something that you are failing with right now? Failing in? Absolutely crushing failure. The question is, what can you find in it? And what can you see as a result of that failure that you wouldn't have been able to see? Embrace that moment of failure when your face is in the dirt and you're covered in muck and you look up for the first time. The question is, what do you see differently? For me, when I looked up from the muck and crap of the failed book attempt and the thousands and thousands of dollars that I spent on it with nothing to show, I looked up and I saw a person in my life encouraging me to step out and do something different and use the innate skills, maybe the gift that I have and that I had to do something differently. Along the way, I've encountered so many interesting people. And for those of you who listen on a regular basis, I want to say thank you. Thanks for being part of this community, this uncommodified journey. A group of people who is listening in and challenging ourselves to stand up and stand out for all the right reasons. To not be a dime a dozen kind of person, to influence the worlds that we have authority in or have influence over for good, and to break that evil spell of sameness. Not just being, as episode 1 said, not just being a homogeneous human, but understanding that we are unique Homo Sapiens with something to contribute. So again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. Thanks for listening to this 100th episode. And I'm not sure where this journey is going to go, where it's going to take me. I don't know when I'm going to get off this ride. All I can tell you is I'm going to keep doing this as long as I love it and have passion for it. I'm going to do it. And other than that, nothing else matters to me. Have an excellent day and go out and uncommodify your world for the benefit of others and your benefit as well. Thanks for listening and thanks for coming on this journey with me. Cheers.